"Who the hell are you?" Laughter followed instantly, sharp, rehearsed, cruel. A woman in a scarlet gown, diamonds heavy on her neck, leaned forward, her manicured finger stabbing the air at one particular guest. Her husband, silver hair slicked back, nearly spilled his wine as he barked out a laugh. His teeth flashed, his chest shook, and the crowd turned to see the spectacle. They weren't laughing at a joke, they were laughing at her. The woman in white, the one who stood perfectly still, her back straight, eyes steady. A black woman, elegant in a gown that whispered power through simplicity, no sequins, no sparkle, just lines so sharp the room itself seemed to draw breath around her. At her side, a man in a midnight tuxedo, jaw firm, eyes cutting, shoulders squared as though absorbing the weight of every stare directed at them. Around them, champagne flutes paused mid-air. Conversations stumbled into silence. Phones hovered, ready. The ballroom, moments ago a celebration of generosity, had transformed into a coliseum, two predators smirking, two targets standing unshaken. "Tell me," the woman in red said again, her smile too wide, her tone dipped in mockery. "Who the hell invited you to this room?" The laughter grew louder, but the woman in white didn't move. She didn't blink. She didn't raise her voice. Her silence was louder than their ridicule. Her gaze locked forward, unflinching, and that composure only made the insults sting sharper for everyone watching. The man beside her shifted slightly, his hand brushing hers, a subtle signal. "We've seen this before." She nodded once, almost invisible, as if to say, "And we'll handle it the same way we always do." From the corner, a young server froze mid-step, tray trembling in his grip. His eyes flickered between the mocking laughter and the calm figure refusing to bend. He wasn't the only one. Two guests near the back exchanged glances, one of them whispering, Are they really doing this? Here?" But the woman in red kept going. "This isn't your crowd, not your table, not your night. Security should take care of people like you." She smirked, lifting her glass to her lips with the arrogance of someone certain the room belonged to her. The black woman in white finally tilted her head, ever so slightly, eyes gleaming beneath the chandelier. A quiet storm, a silence that promised an answer no one was ready for. And before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change, and we're glad you're here. Now, back to her. Because tonight, in this very ballroom, the laughter that tried to humiliate her would be swallowed by something far louder, the sound of truth. The laughter still echoed, bouncing off marble walls and crystal chandeliers. But the woman in white did not flinch. She stood rooted, spine straight, eyes calm. To everyone else, she was a stranger in borrowed elegance. To herself, she was exactly where she belonged. Her name was Maya Caldwell, 42, founder and CEO of Caldwell Global Holdings, a company whose name alone carried weight in boardrooms across New York, London, and Dubai. Tonight, she had chosen not to lead with the title. She arrived without her entourage, without her press team, without the protective glow of power that usually precedes her. She wore white deliberately, clean, sharp, unadorned. Not a single jewel except the modest diamond studs in her ears. No designer logo screaming for validation. Just fabric cut to precision, simplicity turned into defiance. The kind of gown that whispers, "I don't need to prove my worth to you." At her side, her husband Jordan carried the same energy. His tuxedo was immaculate, but understated. Black tie nodded with quiet confidence. He wasn't there to draw attention. He was there to anchor her, to hold the ground steady while the room attempted to shake it. To the rest of the gala crowd, they looked out of place. No flashy introductions, no familiar last names from the city's social pages, just two figures standing firm among the glitter and noise. And that, for some, was enough to trigger suspicion. Maya had seen this exact scene before. At 25, she walked into her first investors' gala in Atlanta, wearing a thrifted black dress, and was asked if she was with catering. At 32, in London, a man in a velvet blazer asked whose assistant she was. At 39, she was mistaken for a guest's driver while waiting outside the Waldorf. Tonight, the faces were different, but the energy was identical. Disbelief dressed up as superiority. Her silence was not weakness. It was memory layered over memory, shaping armor invisible to everyone else. Jordan shifted slightly closer, his voice low, meant only for her. "Same playbook," he murmured. Maya's lips curved just enough to register as a smile, though not for them. For herself. For the knowledge that she already knew how this would end. Behind them, a young waiter with trembling hands steadied his tray, eyes flickering nervously at the powerful couple being cornered. He recognized her. He couldn't place the name, but he had seen the face on a magazine cover in a barber shop once. The recognition sat in his chest like a secret. Across the room, a junior associate from one of the hedge funds whispered to his colleague, "She's nobody. Just watch." The colleague glanced once more at Maya and frowned, uneasy, as if something didn't add up. The couple in red carried on, smirking, sipping, feeding the room's appetite for humiliation. But the air was already shifting. The chandeliers still glowed, the violins still played, yet an undercurrent pulsed beneath the glamour. Guests leaned in closer, sensing that the silence from the woman in white wasn't submission, it was a fuse, and when it burned out, the blast would rearrange the entire room. The violinists never missed a note, but the music had changed. Not on their strings on the room itself. What had been background melody now felt like a mockery, sweet notes laced over a sour scene. The woman in scarlet leaned in again, her perfume thick in the air, her laughter sharp enough to draw more faces from across the ballroom. "It's almost cute," she said loudly, as if she wanted the chandeliers themselves to hear. "Every year there's someone who sneaks in for the free champagne, this one even dressed up for it." She raised her glass and let the bubbles rise like proof of her own superiority. Her husband, silver hair catching the light, added fuel. "Next time maybe they'll try the kitchen. At least there, no one would notice." His laugh rolled out heavy, rehearsed, ugly. Around them, clusters of guests began to circle, drawn by the scent of spectacle. Pearls glistened, cufflinks flashed, but it was the eyes, the stares, the narrowing looks that thickened the air, some amused, some cautious, some hungry for the humiliation about to unfold. Maya didn't move. Jordan stood firm beside her. Their stillness was both shield and sword, but it only fed the crowd's appetite. Silence in this room was read as weakness, and weakness was a feast. "Security!" the woman in scarlet called out casually, tilting her chin toward the far end of the hall. "We may have a problem here. Someone wandered into the wrong party." Her words landed like stones, skipping across water, each ripple pulling more attention. A young man in a tailored navy suit raised an eyebrow. "Really? At a charity gala?" he muttered. His date shushed him, uneasy, but not before her eyes flicked toward Maya with a spark of recognition she couldn't quite place. The waiter from earlier clutched his tray tighter. He had stopped pretending not to watch. He looked from Maya to the couple, mocking her and back again, his throat working as if he wanted to speak but couldn't find the courage. Meanwhile, the crowd swelled. Conversations stuttered and died. Phones rose discreetly, little red recording dots blooming like fireflies. A scene was forming, and everyone wanted a piece of it. The man in silver hair took a step closer, his polished shoes clicking against marble. He smirked. "Do you hear that?" he asked Maya directly. "That's the sound of a room deciding you don't belong." He swirled the wine in his glass like it was evidence, then leaned back with a satisfied grin. Jordan shifted, but Maya touched his arm, lightly hold. Her face was unreadable, carved from calm. A woman across the room whispered too loudly, "She doesn't look like she belongs here. Not in that dress." "Not in this room," her companion echoed. The circle tightened. Their words were the air itself now, thick with doubt, heavy with dismissal. The couple in scarlet smiled like royalty, confident the scene was theirs to command. But beneath the chandeliers, beneath the polished marble and crystal, another current was rising. Maya's silence was not a collapse, it was a countdown. And every insult, every laugh, every whispered judgment was a tick closer to the explosion they didn't see coming. The laughter didn't fade. It thickened. Like smoke filling the ballroom, it pressed against skin and collarbones, testing to see who would cough first. Maya did not cough. She did not speak. She reached for the champagne flute from a passing tray, lifted it with steady fingers, and let the golden liquid catch the chandelier's glow. Then she sipped slow, unhurried, deliberate. Her silence swallowed their laughter like velvet over steel. Jordan, at her side, mirrored the calm. His shoulders stayed square, his gaze straight ahead, his hand resting lightly at his side. No clenched fists, no outward defiance, just composure. the kind that unsettles more than shouting ever could. The woman in scarlet tilted her head, smile faltering just slightly. She had expected protest, embarrassment, maybe even tears. Instead, she found stillness, the kind of stillness that turns a crowded room into a witness stand. She's not answering because she knows she doesn't belong, the man with silver hair announced, filling the silence with his own voice. He wanted it to sound like victory. To some, it did. To others, it rang like insecurity dressed in bravado. Maya lowered her glass, eyes sweeping across the room. She didn't meet their gaze with fire, she met it with ice. Calm, unflinching, a mirror to every smirk and sneer. The kind of look that says, "I've been here before, and I'll be here long after you're gone." Near the back, the young waiter shifted his weight, tray trembling slightly less than before. He stared at Maya, chest rising and falling like he was drawing courage from her silence. A guest in pearls whispered, "Why isn't she saying anything?" Her companion leaned in. "Because she has nothing to say. She's cornered." But the room wasn't so sure. Something about the woman in white didn't fit the script they were writing for her. She wasn't shrinking. She wasn't flustered. She was waiting. Jordan leaned slightly toward her, his voice low, intimate, meant only for her ear. Same story, different room. Maya's lips barely moved, the faintest curve at the corner. "And the same ending," she whispered back. The woman in scarlet bristled, raising her glass higher. "Enjoy the champagne while you can. Security will be here soon." Her words were laced with triumph, but her eyes darted just once toward Maya's still, unreadable face. Maya didn't flinch. She didn't defend herself. She let the silence hold the weight of every insult hurled her way, and the silence grew heavier. Phones tilted higher, red recording dots blooming brighter. Guests leaned forward, tension pulling them closer, unable to look away. Some smiled, eager for drama. Others frowned, sensing an imbalance they couldn't yet name. But everyone knew one thing. This wasn't over. Maya had said nothing. And yet, somehow, she had already shifted the room. The ballroom had become a theater, and the silence that hung between Maya and her tormentors was the spotlight. Every breath, every glance, every sip of champagne fed the performance. Near the edge of the room, the young waiter could no longer pretend he wasn't watching. His tray wobbled once, then steadied as he fixed his gaze on Maya. Something about her stillness pulled him in, like gravity. He remembered her face on a magazine cover, in the barber shop where the news sat for weeks. He hadn't read the article, but he remembered the headline, "The Quiet Force Behind Global Shifts." The memory flared now, like a match in the dark. A few tables away, a pair of guests in sleek evening wear whispered to each other. One of them, a junior analyst from a hedge fund, leaned forward. "Should I record this? This feels wrong." His companion, a woman with sharp eyes, nudged her phone under the table and tapped record without answering. The red dot glowed against her sequined clutch. Across the ballroom, a middle-aged man tugged at his bow tie and muttered to no one in particular, "Not a good look. Not here. Not tonight." His date frowned but said nothing, torn between discomfort and the magnetic pull of scandal. The couple in scarlet noticed the shifting air. Their smiles tightened, their laughter a little louder than before, as if volume could mask the unease crawling at the edges of the crowd. "Don't just stand there," the woman in scarlet called toward the staff. "Where's security?" Her voice cracked slightly, a note of impatience slipping through. But no one moved. Instead, more eyes turned toward Maya. Her white gown caught the chandelier's glow like armor. She stood motionless, a figure carved from calm, while the room rearranged itself around her silence. The waiter finally lowered his tray to a side table. His chest rose and fell, his decision heavy in his lungs. "This isn't right," he whispered, though no one close enough seemed ready to echo him. A woman with pearls near the back raised her phone higher. "If they try to throw her out, the whole world's going to see," she muttered. Her friend tugged her wrist, nervous, but didn't stop her. The man in silver hair barked out a laugh, too sharp, too forced. "Look at her. She's paralyzed, doesn't even know how to answer." His words bounced off marble and crystal, but their weight didn't land the way he wanted. Too many faces were no longer laughing. Too many phones were catching the cracks. Maya lifted her glass again, unshaken, her eyes sweeping the crowd once more. This time, she caught the gaze of the young waiter. For the briefest second, she nodded tiny, precise, enough to tell him, I see you. I know you see me. His throat tightened. The secret recognition grew heavier. And for the first time that night, the balance of the room shifted not with an insult, but with a witness. The story was no longer theirs to tell. It was being recorded, whispered, shared in real time. And soon, the witnesses would not be silent. The ballroom's golden glow dimmed in spirit, even as the chandeliers still poured light like liquid fire. What had begun as mocking whispers now swelled into full voices. The air buzzed, and tension draped over the gala like an unwanted curtain. From near the stage, a tall man in a velvet dinner jacket stepped forward. His name was Charles Denton, event chair, longtime donor, a man whose voice often carried the weight of final word at gatherings like this. He had been watching from a distance, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Now he approached, heels clicking on polished marble, and the crowd instinctively parted for him. "Enough," he said loudly, his baritone cutting through the chatter, his gaze locked on Maya. "I don't know how you slipped into this room, but this gala is for benefactors and verified guests only. You're holding up the evening." Gasps murmured across the floor. A few phones tilted higher. Charles wasn't a sideshow like the couple in scarlet. He was authority, the voice of legitimacy. His words carried weight. And yet, as he stared at Maya, dismissing her presence entirely, a different weight settled on the room. Discomfort. The woman in scarlet smirked in triumph, gesturing as if to say, "See, even Charles agrees." Her husband chuckled, emboldened by the backing of someone with status. "Told you, doesn't belong here." But Maya remained still, her face composed. She let the accusation wash over her without flinching. Her silence unnerved Charles more than he expected. His brow furrowed. Jordan shifted beside her, jaw tightening. But once again, Maya's touch on his sleeve held him steady. The restraint was maddening for those expecting a scene, and magnetic for those beginning to see the imbalance clearly. A guest near the front row whispered sharply, "That's Maya Caldwell, isn't it?" Her companion frowned. "Can't be. If it was, they'd recognize her." The doubt lingered, hanging like smoke above the crowd. Charles stepped closer, lowering his tone but not his arrogance. "If you don't present credentials immediately, I'll have security escort you out." His words were cold, procedural, the kind that carried an echo of policy. At the back, the waiter swallowed hard. He wanted to shout, to call out the name he remembered, but fear pinned him silent. Still, his eyes never left Maya. The pearl-clad woman recording muttered into her phone mic, "He just threatened her with security. This is unreal." The couple in scarlet clinked their glasses together as if to toast her downfall. "Finally," the woman in red muttered, "order in the room." But order wasn't what the room felt. Unease rippled wider now, the kind that slips under skin and makes hands tremble on wine stems. Maya raised her glass once more, slow and deliberate. Her silence was louder than Charles's authority. The crowd leaned in, restless, waiting, the tension now unbearable. The escalation had reached its peak. The next move would decide whether the night collapsed into cruelty or transformed into something unforgettable. The ballroom no longer shimmered with ease. The chandeliers still blazed, but the air beneath them was brittle, ready to snap. Every guest could feel it. This was no longer playful humiliation. This was something harsher. Charles Denton stepped closer, his velvet jacket brushing against Maya's gown as he loomed. "Enough games," he said, his voice like a gavel. "If you won't show proof you belong here, then you don't belong here." He stretched out his hand, palm flat, expectant. "Your invitation, now." Maya's gaze lowered briefly to his hand, then lifted back to his eyes, calm, unwavering. She didn't move. Her stillness enraged him. "Fine," Charles snapped. He turned his head sharply toward the nearest staff member. "Take her glass. If she's not a guest, she has no right to our hospitality." Gasps cut the air. A junior attendant hesitated, eyes wide, tray trembling in his grip. He took one slow step toward Maya, then stopped, frozen under her quiet stare. The stare wasn't hostile. It was commanding. His hand dropped back to his side. The woman in scarlet laughed, shrill and triumphant. "If she won't hand over an invitation, maybe she should hand over her purse. That'll tell us who she really island." A few guests murmured uncomfortably. "That's too far," one man muttered. But others smirked, entertained, their phones angled closer. Jordan's jaw flexed. His hand twitched toward his pocket, but Maya's touch restrained him again. Her calm was more dangerous than any outburst. Charles, red with indignation, reached for the glass still in Maya's hand. "Then I'll remove you myself." His fingers closed around the stem. For a heartbeat, it was a tug-of-war of silence, the crystal between them, his grip insistent, hers steady as stone. The sound, when it broke, was sharp enough to slice the room in half. The stem snapped, shards scattering across the marble floor like ice. A ripple of shock ran through the crowd. Phones shook in hands, recording everything. Maya did not flinch. Champagne dripped onto the hem of her gown, golden against white, but her face remained composed, carved from steel. The man in silver hair seized the moment, his voice booming over the murmurs. "Call the police. She's trespassing, stealing our time, our space. People like her always think they can slip in." The words hung like poison. A woman near the back gasped. Someone else whispered, "Did he really just say people like her?" The young waiter's fists clenched at his sides. His voice almost broke free, but again he swallowed it down. "Not yet." Charles gestured toward the exit. "Security, remove her, now." But no guards moved. Their radios buzzed softly at their hips, but their feet stayed planted. Even they could feel the shift, the unease of being recorded, the awareness that this moment was no longer private. The Scarlet Woman's smile faltered as she realized the laughter had thinned. What once sounded like a chorus now echoed only between her and her husband. And Maya? She stood in the center of it all, shards of crystal at her feet, champagne soaking her gown, but unshaken. Her silence weighed more than Charles's authority, more than the insults, more than the broken glass. The humiliation they thought they delivered had only drawn every eye tighter upon her. The breaking point had been reached, and the room was about to learn who exactly they had tried to erase. The shards of crystal still glittered across the marble, but Maya stood unmoved, champagne sliding down the silk of her gown like liquid gold refusing to stain. The crowd waited for her to crack, for tears, for retreat, for rage. None came. Instead, she lifted her hand, elegant and precise, and touched Jordan's wrist. One subtle signal. His phone was already in his palm before most guests realized he'd moved. A murmur swept through the room. The couple in scarlet leaned forward, expectant. Charles Denton sneered. "Yes, call whoever you like. It won't change the fact that you don't belong here." But Maya wasn't calling for help. She was calling for order. Jordan pressed the screen once, then handed her the phone. She placed it against her ear, voice steady, audible enough for those nearest to catch. "Marcus," she said softly, "activate the protocol. Timestamp this moment. I want the full audit live." On the other end, a crisp voice answered without hesitation. "Understood. The system is ready." The words landed like a quiet thunderclap. Guests nearby glanced at each other, confused. Protocol? Audit? The waiter froze, realization dawning in his eyes. Maya lowered the phone but didn't end the call. "Stay on," she instructed. Her gaze swept across the crowd. Not a tremor in her voice, not a flicker in her stance. The woman in scarlet tried to laugh, but the sound cracked midair. "What's that supposed to mean? Some imaginary assistant?" Jordan finally spoke, his baritone calm and cutting. "Imaginary assistants don't answer calls in real time." A ripple passed through the room. Doubt spread like ink in water. The pearl-clad woman recording raised her phone higher. "She's logging it," she whispered into her mic. "Everything they're saying, it's on record." Charles Denton's face flushed deeper. "Ridiculous," he barked. "Audits? Logs? This is a gala, not a courtroom. Stop pretending you're someone important." But the silence that followed didn't support him. Too many people had stopped smirking. Too many phones had caught the break in his composure. Maya spoke again, each word deliberate. "Every second is being documented. Every insult, every gesture. If you're so certain I don't belong, then stand by those words when they're reviewed." The crowd shifted uneasily. The weight of being witnessed not just by those in the ballroom, but by whoever was now on the other end of that call began to sink in. The woman in scarlet's hand trembled as she lifted her glass. "She's bluffing," she whispered to her husband, though her eyes betrayed doubt. Maya took one small step forward, her gown trailing over broken glass without hesitation. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The words carried sharper than any shout. "You wanted to erase me," she said, calm as stone. "Now you've written yourselves into history instead." The room inhaled as one. No exhale followed. For the first time that night, the power was shifting, quietly, irreversibly. The room pulsed with unease. Phones hovered higher. Champagne glasses trembled in polished hands. The laughter that had once filled the ballroom had collapsed into whispers and static. Maya lowered Jordan's phone, placing it calmly onto the nearest table as though she had just set down a dagger. She didn't need it anymore. The silence belonged to her now. From the stage, the MC adjusted his microphone, glancing nervously at the crowd before scanning his notes. His voice carried, uncertain at first, then steadier. Ladies and gentlemen, before we continue tonight's auction, we would like to acknowledge our primary benefactor. His eyes widened as he read the card. Miss Maya Caldwell, founder and chairwoman of Caldwell Global Holdings. The words detonated across the ballroom. Gasps, murmurs, a collective shiver rippling from wall to wall. Heads turned sharply toward the woman in white, the one who had stood still, who had absorbed every insult without flinching. The waiter dropped his tray, silver crashing against marble. "I knew it," he whispered, his voice breaking into the open. "I knew that face." The pearl-clad woman gasped audibly. "Oh my God, she's the one funding this entire gala." Phones pivoted in unison, lenses locking on Maya as if the reveal itself demanded to be broadcast. Charles Denton's jaw hung slack. His face, once flushed with indignation, drained pale. "No," he muttered. "That's impossible." The woman in scarlet staggered back a step, her smile dissolving. Her husband's wine glass trembled, red liquid sloshing dangerously close to his cuff. Their triumph had turned to ash in their throats. Maya stepped forward, shards of broken crystal crunching under her heels, each step measured, unhurried. Her voice was calm, low, but it carried like thunder. "You demanded my invitation," she said. "This gala exists because of my invitation." She let that hang in the air, long enough for every guest to feel its weight. "Caldwell Global pledged $20 million to tonight's fund," she continued. "Your programs, your research, your scholarships, every one of them depends on that support. And yet here I stand, treated as an intruder." Her eyes moved across the room, not lingering on Charles, nor the scarlet couple, but sweeping over the entire assembly. Every stare was met, every face forced to absorb her words. "This is not the first time," she said, voice steady. "At 25, I was called a caterer. At 32, an assistant. At 39, a driver. Tonight, at 42, still the same story. But tonight," she paused, the silence vibrating with tension. "Tonight it ends." The crowd exhaled as one, a sound like wind tearing through leaves. Guests looked at one another, shame flickering in some eyes, awe in others. Jordan finally stepped forward, his voice deep, resonant. "You questioned whether she belonged. Now ask yourselves, why do you?" It landed like a hammer. The ballroom shook not with noise, but with revelation. For the first time all evening, Maya smiled. Not wide, not victorious, just enough to cut through the air with quiet certainty. The humiliation they tried to pin on her had transformed into the moment that exposed them all. The reveal detonated like a fault line splitting open, and the aftershocks rippled across every corner of the ballroom. What once was laughter had turned into silence sharp enough to cut skin. Every insult hurled minutes before now hung in the air like evidence. Charles Denton staggered a step back. His velvet jacket, once a mantle of authority, now looked like a costume worn by a man caught playing a role he didn't deserve. His mouth opened as if to recover, but no words came. The MC's announcement had stripped his authority bare. The scarlet woman's hand shook so violently that the champagne spilled across her wrist. She tried to dab at it with a napkin, but her movements were frantic, desperate, exposing her panic more than concealing it. Her husband's silver hair no longer gleamed with confidence. Sweat slicked his temples, his laughter long gone. He whispered something sharp into her ear, something that sounded like blame. Around them, the crowd shifted like a tide. Guests who had smirked now straightened their faces, tugging at their collars, suddenly remembering they were on camera. Phones pointed not at Maya anymore, but at Charles and the scarlet couple, their discomfort immortalized in red recording dots. The pearl-clad woman lowered her phone just long enough to whisper to her neighbor, "They humiliated the sponsor of the night," in her own gala. The neighbor nodded, wide-eyed, shame and awe fighting in his expression. The young waiter stood frozen, tray long abandoned, his chest heaving. He looked at Maya not with pity, not with doubt, but with reverence. She had absorbed every insult, every dismissal, and in one moment turned the stage into her own. Charles finally found his voice, though it trembled. I wasn't aware, if I had known. His excuses cracked before they reached the end. The words rang hollow, a desperate scramble for footing on marble that had already given way. The Scarlet Woman attempted a laugh, brittle as glass. It was a misunderstanding, of course, just a little mistake. Maya's gaze cut toward her, sharp, measured, final. The laugh died in the woman's throat. Phones captured it all, the pale faces, the trembling hands, the broken composure. The narrative had inverted completely. They were no longer the accusers. They were the spectacle. Jordan stepped slightly closer to Maya, his presence solid as a wall. He didn't need to speak. The room had already spoken for them. Guests began murmuring, not about Maya, but about Charles, about the couple in scarlet. Can you believe they said that to her? She funds this entire event. They're finished. The shift was complete. Those who mocked were now mocked. Those who judged were now judged. The stage belonged to Maya not because she seized it, but because they had handed it to her, unaware, unprepared, and unable to take it back. And as the silence deepened, as their collapse played out before every lens and every witness, one truth was undeniable. The power in the room had changed hands. For good. The ballroom had turned into a court, and Maya was the only one fit to deliver the verdict. Every face was turned to her now, waiting not for her to defend herself, but to decide the fate of those who had tried to erase her. Maya took a single step forward. Broken glass crunched beneath her heel. The sound sliced through the silence, commanding more attention than any gavel. She lifted her chin, eyes narrowing on Charles Denton. "You dared to call me uninvited," she said evenly. "Yet this event would not exist without my signature. Without Caldwell Global's funding, there would be no scholarships, no programs, no stage for you to posture on." Charles' lips quivered. I didn't know." Maya didn't let him finish. "You didn't care to know, and ignorance is not an excuse, it's negligence." Her gaze shifted to the scarlet couple. They wilted under it, shoulders sagging, eyes darting to the exits, as though escape might still be possible. "You," Maya said, voice cutting clean. "You mocked me in front of this room. You laughed at the idea that I belonged. And yet, you've spent years lobbying for Caldwell contracts. You've begged for meetings you never received." The Scarlet Woman shook her head desperately. We were only joking." "Justice is not a joke," Maya interrupted, her words iron wrapped in silk. Jordan's phone buzzed softly. He lifted it, glanced at the screen, then handed it to her. She tapped once, her expression unchanging. "Marcus, lock their accounts. Effective immediately. Suspend all pending contracts. Freeze negotiations. Flag tonight's footage for legal review." The words hung heavy. Gasps erupted from the crowd. Charles paled further. The scarlet couple clutched at each other, horrified. And then, as if on cue, Jordan's phone lit up again. A voice, calm and professional, spilled from the speaker. "Confirmed. Their access has been revoked. Documentation logged. Effective now." Red. That was the word on every face. Charles's cheeks burned crimson with humiliation. The Scarlet Woman's gown seemed suddenly too on the nose, a costume marking guilt. Her husband's cuff dripped red wine where his hand had trembled. Maya's eyes swept the crowd once more. "I will not tolerate disrespect, not toward myself, and not toward anyone who looks like me, dresses like me, or stands in a room they're told they don't belong in. Tonight, let this serve as precedent. Disrespect has consequences, immediate and final." The waiter exhaled sharply, almost a sob of relief. Guests murmured, voices rising not against her, but in applause. The pearl-clad woman began clapping first, slow and deliberate. Others followed, a wave of sound building until it filled the hall with thunder. Maya didn't bow, didn't smile wide. She stood tall, absorbing the applause not as flattery but as confirmation. Her judgment had been delivered, and it was irreversible. The applause thundered through the ballroom, echoing off marble and glass, rattling the chandeliers as if even they bowed to the shift of power. But Maya raised her hand, just slightly, and the noise softened into silence, not forced voluntary. The kind of silence born when every soul in the room realizes they are standing in the presence of something greater than spectacle. Maya looked out over the crowd, over Charles, trembling, his velvet jacket now a cage instead of armor, over the scarlet couple, their arrogance melted into shame, their eyes darting like cornered prey. Over the guests who had laughed, whispered, doubted. Over the few who had filmed, who had stood uneasy, who had begun to question. Her voice was calm, low, but it rolled like thunder across the hall. You tried to write me out of this room, but you failed to realize I built this room. Every chandelier above you, every table beneath your hands, every dollar pledged tonight is here because I chose it. Because I believed in something bigger than myself. And yet, when I walked in quietly, you saw nothing but your prejudice. Her eyes lingered on the scarlet woman. You measured me by my dress. She turned to Charles. You measured me by my silence. Then to the crowd at large. You measured me by what you thought power should look like. But power does not shout. Power does not beg. Power simply island. The waiter stood straighter now, eyes wide, chest swelling with pride that wasn't his alone but shared, contagious. Around him, other guests shifted uncomfortably, realizing they had laughed too soon, judged too easily. Maya's gaze softened slightly, the edges of steel tempered by something deeper. I don't need cameras. I don't need applause. I don't even need your approval. I stand here because my work, my vision, and my dignity put me here. And that is something no mockery can erase. The chandeliers glinted, light cascading like a crown over her head. She took one final breath, then let the words fall with the weight of stone. Remember this night, not because of what was said to me, but because of what it revealed about you, about all of us. And know this, I am not the exception. I am the result. Silence roared. Then the applause returned, not scattered, not hesitant, but tidal, crashing, unstoppable. Guests rose from their chairs, a standing ovation not just for her wealth or her title, but for her unshakable presence, her unassailable truth. Charles slumped, defeated. The scarlet couple shrank into shadows. But Maya stood taller than ever, the embodiment of justice carried out not by force, but by composure. Jordan stepped closer, his hand brushing hers, steadying, affirming. Together, they turned toward the exit, not as guests leaving a gala, but as owners leaving their hall. And as the ovation surged behind them, the message crystallized in every witness's mind. Dignity does not need a microphone. Justice does not need permission. It only needs the courage to stand and the silence to let truth do the rest.